these particular gender roles, this allows them to actually absorb or even be exposed to the information that allows them to protect themselves. Worse, if they're not, if the messages that are out there are talking about gay sex and what it means for gays and homosexuals, if that man, because he's coming from communities that say to be gay means to be less than a man, and the last thing he has for his identity is what it means to be a man, then those ads aren't speaking to him. And so therefore, what we've found is that men who are having sex with men may engage in unprotected sex. And so this is about gender roles and homophobia. If we start addressing gender roles and homophobia within the black community, we will actually address our seroconversion rate.
My question would be, why is this a dialogue about black civil rights and gay civil rights and immigrant civil rights, rather than just a conversation about civil rights? Why, what in society makes it so that it has to be separate in those ways? Oh, we'll fight for these rights, and at the same time, but in a different venue, we're fighting for these rights as well, rather than human rights. And when I say human rights, I'm not talking about the HRC's version of human rights.
I hear you. Because of the unique histories, that when you're writing policy, the way how exclusion may be visited upon one group may be different from another. Case in point would be that marriage is a way of excluding gay people from access to an economic base that would allow them to pass on property, allow them, this isn't just about, oh, I get to love my partner. This is about money. The other piece about this is that if that's true, so if you're looking at African American exclusion, that's not true. African Americans are allowed to have money, but what's going on for African Americans, regardless of sexual orientation, particularly if you're disenfranchised and there's a high proportion of African American children living in poverty? Wait a minute, what's going on with the school systems and the tax base? So you do have to address them separately. Now, what I'm hearing you say is that, well, let's put it all together. We still could address them separately, but call it human rights. I think we can get there. We haven't even had the conversation so that we can even understand we're talking about the same thing. So we can move down that path, but we haven't even started to coalition build. We've just done this fake coalition building that actually puts it together like a puzzle piece, but doesn't do the overlap as to where the intersections lie. So you can't just say, okay, let's get into a room and call it human rights until you've actually examined the nuances of where those intersections are.
You said that the title not only discriminated against like black gays, but also against like lesbians and every other form of the word. So how exactly do you feel like we were put out by that title? Like, I mean, other than the fact that like gay is a really generalized term, but how exactly do you feel like the article forgot about every other kind of community in the community as a whole?
I'm glad you asked that question because I forgot to say that the article had nothing to do with that title. If you read the article, Michael Gross's, as weak as still the article was, I kept reading through it, and I read it twice on the train to make sure that when I wrote back, I didn't come off as an idiot. And I realized that clearly the editors made a decision. And I've actually heard from Angela Gross, his sister. She found me on Facebook. This has been a really weird journey, trust me, to tell me that that was the truth. Now, so how does the title itself disappear? It's just that we continually, they weren't using gay in that general sense. They could have said LGBT or something, but they weren't considering that it's going to disappear lesbians, it's going to disappear transgender people, and more importantly, well, that sometimes in some parts of the country we say gay and I'm a gay woman, or we're talking about gay rights. That's a problematic phrase. We need to do better than that. But also by placing black in there, it placed black in the central as the most oppressed. And while one can have conversations around that, and those are interesting dinner conversations, those aren't true analysis of what's going on with people's histories. That we should be really careful around that, and in fact, never hold up for comparison other than if you're doing a comparative analysis for understanding the difference between the genocide of the Middle Passage and the genocide of Manifest Destiny. That's an interesting dissertation and an interesting analysis, but when it comes to civil rights and public policy, that's absolutely unnecessary. So that's what I mean by that. Did I answer your question? No problem.
Okay. One thing that irritated me a little is in the title it said new, as if like this hasn't existed for many, 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 many years. So like, I know you touched on it saying that it like ignored the history, but I was wondering if you could go a little more in depth about how you really felt about like how they said they wrote new in the title as if it didn't exist before, as if this is like a recent occurrence, like it just happened maybe 5-10 years ago.
You mean the title of the cover? It said gay is the new black. It said the last great civil rights struggle. Is that what you mean?
Well, you know, I kind of took it as like when they put new, as if this hadn't existed before. Like this is a new problem. It's not.
I guess I'm trying to understand. I didn't know where the word new was. Do you have the? Oh, I didn't even think that. Thank you. You pointed out a whole new thing, like gay is the new black. I've completely disappeared that. Gay is the new black. Wow, I honestly hadn't thought that. I guess I'm going to ask you. Tell me your thoughts.
I was mad. Well, as a supporter of the cause, not necessarily a member, it's just, ever since I was little, I've been arguing with people about the cause, like people's parents. So like, just, I don't know, being a supporter just like made me angry. I don't know how to even go further. I think it's ignoring a whole bigger issue.
Yes, they did do that very well. They ignored a lot of histories. I think that I did address it partially in my letter because it was that fashion cliche, you know, fashion as in clothing. It's like, it's the new black. And so it's like this Tim Gunn type statement.
I never saw the article, but when I first saw the title of this on Grand Valley's website, I just thought it was like, oh, so gay is the like popular thing to do now, like that's what this was about. And then I read it, I was like, oh, that makes more sense.
So the unintentional consequence, which makes it even worse in some ways, is almost like, makes it flippant like, oh, it's a new cute thing to do in the face of incredible struggle. Well, I hadn't thought of it that way, and thank you for pointing that one out. There was so much that was fraught with the statement, so thank you for bringing that one forward. I didn't even analyze new other than to place it in that whole old-fashioned cliche. And as you say, that as if black doesn't exist, I hadn't thought of that either. Like I said, so many of us can point out, and I'm hoping some people will share in our last 10 minutes, that exactly what you said, that, wow, I read that differently. Look at how, as Colette said, how many ways they hurt folks and disappear so many others.
Also, now that she brought that up, it kind of, the way it said the last like great oppression or whatever, and with gay is the new black. It's like, okay, so the old black, you know, we don't need to worry about that anymore. It's like this is the last great push before, you know, we get equality, and it's like, no, it's not. It implies that everything else in the world is bright rainbows and sunshine, except for this one big issue here. We need to just ignore everything else and focus all our attention just on that point, when really you've just created a big rift within your own community because you've ignored the folks of color who you start to blame and say, hey, y'all are the ones who took away our rights to marry.
Exactly. Other thoughts? Thank you.
You briefly mentioned something about the lack of homosexuals or blacks in the more physical sciences. You said this discussion exists only in social sciences. What can we do to approach the issue of people not participating in science or math classes just because of their gender or race or sexual preference?
Actually, I'm glad you asked that. That's not exactly what I meant. I was talking about diversity and a toolbox for teaching, so that often what we hear in the STEMs, science, technology, engineering, math, that since we're working in our labs, it's all completely objective because microscopes don't lie and all that. So why would I have to put people together in a classroom and consider cultural issues within these sciences? That's what I was talking about. So that we have to create toolkits so that professors understand that this is important, not just who's in the classroom, but when they arrive in the classroom, they bring their cultures with them and it interacts with the curricula. So that's what I mean.
You briefly discussed gender roles, and I want to know your opinion on how you think gender roles are like affected by race and by LGBT like standards or societies, in particular in like family structures, in comparison to like white privilege.
Oh, we got 5 minutes. Can we stay here for 5 more days? Okay, gender roles difference. Okay. Gender roles are not trans-historical. Does everyone understand what I mean by that? They do not cross history. They have changed with history. Okay. They are also not cross-cultural. One of the funny things that I love to hear from students who come back from exchange who are gay is that they go to places like India, or they go to places in Africa. One who was in Ghana and said, oh my God, the men sit on each other's laps. We don't do that here. That's a sign for gay. The men in India or some Islamic countries hold hands. We don't do that here. That means that's your boyfriend. So so your question is that how does it look different? Well, it looks different for cultures. So we know that our understanding of gender roles in terms of what it means to be man, woman, and really we do put it into those binaries when there's way more than that, is problematic, and we need to have longer conversations. Now, how gender is performed in a multicultural society, I guess in the short time we have here, I'll point to a video that was put together by Jackson Katz, and it's called Tough Guys. And it's fairly decent. It at least starts the conversation around how we perform masculinity. Mostly, he doesn't talk about feminine at all. He talks about the performance of masculinity within different cultures. I think he makes some mistakes, but it allows us to at least start the conversation in a multicultural way. That what does it mean to be a black man, and how I perform masculinity may look different depending on my economic context and where I am in the country. So even before I even get to how white men may perform that, black men perform masculinity in very diverse ways that allow them to to survive in their contexts. Does that get at what you're asking? In a very short time. We have like time for one more, then we gotta go. Sure. Comment, last thoughts?
How something you can leave us with before we leave? Like one thing that you would want us to take now, whether we're students or professionals or somewhere in between, how to continue this conversation in this movement?
Well, what I ask folks, here's the wrap up. The leaving statement is that you can't be silent. You must ask questions. When you're in whichever center you are in downstairs, one, as you're planning events, look around the room and say, whose voice is not present here? Okay, so you have 3 centers. Where's the disabled student center? What do we understand about disability? That we're critically analyzing our context and asking each other questions in how we could be inclusive. So for students, it's about when you're planning your club activities or activities for the center, it's about finding ways to do more collaboration. One, it saves money by and large. I mean, it's an economic good thing. But 2, to work alongside each other. And collaboration does not mean just farming out, okay, we're gonna pay for the posters and you take care of that, and we're gonna pay for the drinks and you take care of the room. That's not collaboration. Collaboration is a much harder thing where you're sitting in the room and talking about why you want a particular room, what colors are going to be on the poster, how does it speak to different people, do we need to possibly even have several types of posters? And usually that's the case. One poster usually does not fit all in a multicultural cross-collaboration at all. And so we have that. 2, on the individual level, it is that we're engaging each other in conversation. What did you think of that speech? Was that garbage? Looking for more information. Asking in your classrooms, asking one another the questions around who does this speak to? Who do these histories speak to? Who does this curriculum speak to? Rather than just observing it. You're at a university. Ask critical questions, critically analyze, get into some dissonance, get uncomfortable. You must get uncomfortable in order to move forward and then back up a bit, go into your in-group. So I say for every 10 minutes of your in-group, do 5 minutes of dissonance and discomfort. I don't know where I found those numbers, but they work. Okay? Thank you so much for inviting me. And remember, since I understand this, fill out your evaluation forms. Thank you.
And we'd like to give you a little gift from Grand Valley to express our appreciation. Thank you. Thank you.